In Acts chapter 10, we have documented for us a momentous occasion in the history of the spread of the gospel. It is there that we read about the conversion of a man by the name of Cornelius. And what makes this account so momentous, apart from just the fact that it is the account of another precious soul won for the Lord, but what makes this particular conversion so momentous, maybe we could say in the eyes of history, is that it is the first conversion to Christianity of a Gentile, a non-Jewish person. In accordance with the eternal purpose of God, it was always intended that the Jews, who had been specially prepared to receive the gospel for over 1,000 years, the Jews would be the first to have the opportunity to hear the gospel message and respond to it. In Romans chapter 1 and verse 16, for example, Paul writes there that the gospel is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, the Jew first, and also the Greek or Gentile. Of course, it's in Acts chapter 2 where we read of the first preaching of the gospel message in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. And being that it is the first time the message is preached, we should not be surprised to find who the audience was on that day. Verse 5 of that chapter tells us that it was Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. So in accordance with the plan of God, the message of salvation through Jesus Christ was first being offered to the Jews. But of course, it was also part of the plan that the message would go to all nations, as Jesus put it in Matthew's account of the Great Commission in Matthew 28. It wasn't intended to only ever be offered to the Jews. In fact, in Mark's account of the Great Commission in Mark 16, Jesus seems to want to make it very clear that no one is to be deprived of the opportunity to hear the gospel message and obey it. See, it is there where Jesus tells them to go preach the gospel to every creature, seeming to want to just ensure that they leave no one out when it comes to giving people the opportunity to hear the message. Well, the beginning of the spread of the message to all nations took place with the conversion of this Roman centurion by the name of Cornelius. As we are introduced to him in Acts chapter 10, we find that he is a good man, devout and generous. He prayed to God always. Now, perhaps it was the result of the time that he had spent living among the Jews, but he was aware of and clearly believed in the God of Israel, the God that Christians worship. It seems that he was trying to find his way to that God and to a relationship with him. Well, as it happens, he sends 3 men, 2 servants of his and 1 soldier under his command, but he sends these 3 men to the city of Joppa. See, Cornelius was in Caesarea, but he sends these 3 men to Joppa so that they can make contact with a man by the name of Simon Peter. And as a result of these men going to Joppa, Peter returns with them to Caesarea, where he shared the gospel message with Cornelius and his household. And the result of all this, as I noted at the beginning, is that the first of many Gentile converts, including yours truly, was baptized that day and added to the Lord's church. But what I really want to share with you regarding this episode is a thought that is prompted by a statement that jumped out at me recently when I reread this conversion account. You see, when those 3 men arrived in Joppa looking for Peter, verse 19 of Acts chapter 10 tells us that the Holy Spirit spoke to Peter at that time, telling him that these men had come for him. And the Spirit went on to say in Acts chapter 10 and verse 20, he goes on to tell Peter, go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. And in reality, he, the Holy Spirit, God, was responsible for those men going to fetch Peter for Cornelius. I mentioned that Cornelius ordered these 3 men to go get Peter. What I didn't mention a moment ago is that Cornelius did this because God told him to. Now we see that in verses 3 through 6 of Acts chapter 10. And then later on, Peter would add a significant detail to this account of God telling Cornelius to send for him, when Peter told the Jewish brethren in Acts 11 and verse 14 that God had told Cornelius to send for Peter because Peter would tell Cornelius words by which he and all his household would be saved. Cornelius was a good man, and God, who knows the hearts of all men, was aware of this. And I believe God was also aware that really all Cornelius needed in order to be saved was to hear the message of salvation, which would tell him what he needed to do. But you know what's interesting to me? That God did not reveal this information to Cornelius himself. Now, it certainly would have been easy enough for God to do that, just to tell Cornelius what he needed to do. It's not a question of what God could do. But the fact of the matter is, God did not do that. God did not, when he spoke to Cornelius, tell Cornelius what he must do to be saved. He didn't tell him himself. Instead, he had Cornelius send for Peter, another human, so that Peter could come and teach Cornelius the good news of Jesus Christ. For whatever reason, the plan of God for the saving of mankind is that humans be taught by other humans what they must do, according, of course, to what is written in God's written word. Think about it. I mentioned the Great Commission a moment ago. In Matthew's account, for example, in Matthew 28 and verse 19, Jesus said to the disciples, "Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations." Now that's the New King James that I generally read from. The 1611 King James renders that as "go and teach all nations." And the actual term that Jesus used there allows for either rendering, make disciples or teach. The term literally means to disciple, to make someone a disciple by teaching them. And Jesus laid the responsibility for teaching on those disciples and all the disciples who would follow them. Similarly, in Mark's account that we looked at, in Mark chapter 16 and verse 15, he says, "Go preach the gospel to every creature." Well, who's given the responsibility for preaching in Mark 16 or teaching or making disciples in Matthew 28? It's disciples. Disciples are responsible for getting the message out. Humans like you and me. Jesus did not command his disciples to go tell all men to wait for a direct revelation from God on what they must do. No, he laid the responsibility for getting the message out to human beings. Now, as we see in the case of Cornelius, or that we might also see in Acts 8 with the case of the Ethiopian, God may arrange the meeting between two humans to see to it that one person can teach the other. But when that meeting takes place, the message will be revealed and it will be taught from human to human. That is simply how God has willed it to be done in this era. Now, this little message today is not so much about the need for every Christian to be involved in carrying out this command to teach others, although that is hugely important, and we who are Christians do need to be taking that to heart, and I believe that most of us, myself included, could be doing more than what we're doing now. So certainly that is something that Christians can take away from this. But what I actually want to emphasize from all this today is that if you are not a Christian, if you are not in a relationship with the Lord, if you are not a saved person and you're waiting for the Lord to speak to you directly, if you're waiting for a direct revelation from God regarding what you need to do to be saved, it's not coming. That's not how it works. And what we see with Cornelius is that's not how it worked even during the apostolic era when God was still speaking to people directly. He spoke directly to Cornelius, but he still had Cornelius send for Peter when Cornelius needed to be taught the gospel. The person who is saved in the era of Christ is the person who will be taught the Lord's will and who will be baptized for the remission of sins by another human being. Now, it is true that while we may not be aware of it in the moment, God may indeed arrange for the meeting between one who is seeking him and one who can teach that person. But at the end of it all, the truth is to be revealed by people who are teaching what is written in the Bible. If you are someone who is looking to find your way to God, who knows but that he may be setting up such an opportunity for you right now. Please feel free to call a number that will be shown in just a moment, if that is the case. Come to the Lord. I hope you have a good day.